Our last topic in this chapter of your e-text is solving rational equations. Now, this is where people start to get a little bit confused because until now we've been working with expressions, but equations are always giving you something equal to something else. And we treat equations differently than we treat expressions. In an equation, when we're asked to solve, right here in step 4, solve for x, we want to have x by itself. So when we're asked to solve a rational equation, we're getting rid of the denominators. You might remember when we started simplifying rational expressions, I hope I reminded you to keep the denominators. Now we're getting rid of them in order to isolate x. And again, I have some steps for you to follow. So whenever you sit down to practice solving rational equations, you should have these steps beside you and work through them one at a time. The first thing we want to do is factor the denominators if possible. Not all denominators will be able to be factored, but some of them will. We want to find the lowest common multiple of the denominators. Remember, sometimes that's known as the LCD, the lowest common denominator. This step is important. We're going to multiply both sides of the equation by the lowest common multiple or the lowest common denominator. Same thing. Make sure we use the distributive property. This step is going to get rid of the denominators. Once the denominators are gone, we can solve for x. And we have to be careful here because we have to check for any restrictions. What did I want to say about that? I don't remember. Let's go ahead and look at the first example. This kind of example we've probably done before. These are just fractions rather than rational expressions. We don't have x in the denominator, but the process we're going to use will be the same. The first thing we were asked to do is find the lowest common multiple of the denominators. I hope you know that the lowest common multiple of these denominators is 10. And I'm suggesting that you should multiply both sides of your equation by the lowest common multiple of the denominators. Notice that I'm not multiplying the numerator and the denominator. I am just multiplying by 10. I am not multiplying by 10 over 10. What this does, I'm going to open my brackets here and multiply each term by 10, is gets rid of the fractions. Now, some of you may have learned a slightly different way of solving these questions, and that's okay. If you have another way that is mathematically correct and you can find the right answer, I am happy with that, as long as you can explain it to me. Okay, so when we're verifying, if you have a different method, make sure you can explain your method. I like to get rid of the fractions. Look what happens here. We have 10 divided by 5. That equals 2. 10 divided by 2, that equals 5. 10 divided by 2 equals 5. I don't have any fractions left. Instead, I have the same kind of equation that we were solving way back in week, was it week 3 or week 4? All we have to do is use the distributive property to open the brackets and solve for x. Remember, I would like you to simplify each side before moving terms. Add 16 to both sides and divide by 7. Our last step here asks us to check for any restrictions on x. We remember that the denominator cannot equal 0. but I don't have x in the denominator in this question. There's no x here, so that means there are no restrictions for this question. Let's look at question 2. We see that the lowest common multiple of the denominators is a minus 3. So we can multiply each side of the equation by our lowest common multiple. Notice that a minus 3 is in brackets because it's a binomial. I want to remember that it has to stay together. We're going to use the distributive property on the left to make sure every term multiplies that lowest common multiple. So we have 2 times a minus 3. And then I have a minus 3 times 3 over a minus 3. And then the right side of the equation times a minus 3. Again, this gets rid of the fractions. A minus 3 divided by a minus 3 is 1. And we can use the distributive property here to open those brackets. 1 times 3. This is just a basic linear equation. Don't get confused with quadratic equations. We were solving quadratic equations by factoring. We said it had to equal 0. Not here. Here we want all of our terms with the variable on one side. And our terms without the variable on the other side. Of course, we want to simplify this first. Subtract a from both sides. Add 9 to both sides. And then we have to check for restrictions. We have to look at the denominator. The denominator cannot equal 0. That tells me that a cannot equal 3. But a doesn't equal 3. It equals 9. So this is fine. We have a solution for this equation. Why don't you pause your video and try this one? Multiply both sides of the equation by the lowest common multiple. 6 times m minus 4. Now, I know that some of you will have looked at this and thought, well, I can just cross multiply. And you're right, you can. I don't usually teach cross multiplication because I've encountered too many people who use it incorrectly. And it's just another process. We can use the same process over and over again, hopefully making things easier. I see here that I can divide out the m minus 4s. And on this side, I can divide out 6. So we're left with 6 times m equals m plus 4 times m minus 4. This is a difference of squares. Are you remembering that formula? Now we have a quadratic equation. We have m squared. We want to solve this by factoring. That means the equation needs to equal 0. I'm going to subtract 6m from both sides. Don't forget your 0. I don't want to see your factoring work here. I only want to see the factors. Remember, we're using that 0 factor theorem that says that m minus 8 could equal 0 or m plus 2 could equal 0. So we have 2 possible solutions. We need to check for restrictions. We only have one denominator containing our variable. There's no m here. We see that m cannot equal 4. So we have two solutions here, -2 and 8. One more question. I think we should do this one together. Do you remember the steps? It's been a while since we looked at them. Step 1 says to factor, I don't know why I put factor the denominators and find the lowest common multiple of the denominators. Okay, let's do that. When we look at our expressions, we see that this first expression needs r plus 7 and r minus 2. The second expression needs r plus 7. We already have it. The third expression needs r minus 2. We already have that one as well. So the lowest common multiple of these denominators is r plus 7 times r minus 2. We're going to multiply both sides of the equation by r plus 7 and r minus 2. Remember, you're going to need to use the distributive property on the left so that both terms are multiplied. I'm going to write that out here so we can take a look at it. All right, you can see that I've multiplied each term by the lowest common multiple of the denominators. And now we can start dividing. We see here that both factors in the denominator are divided out. We're left with 1 times 4r minus 4. In the next term, r plus 7 is divided out. So we have plus 2 times r minus 2. Remember, when you're multiplying, order doesn't matter. And I like the integer in front of that binomial better. In our last term, r minus 2 divides out, and we're left with 1 times r plus 7, or just r plus 7. So in one step, we're able to get rid of all of the denominators. Now we can finish that up. We simplified the left side of the equation. We subtracted r and added 8, and we found that r equals 3. We need to check for restrictions. We have two terms in the denominator. We see that r cannot equal -7, and r cannot equal 2. Let's pause here for now. In the next lecture, we'll practice some more.